Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Meraki Unboxed podcast. My name is Sammy Brenner. You know me, you know my voice. I'm going to be taking you through the episode today, and we have an awesome guest who's a first timer, I believe, on the podcast, which is always fun. Maybe not. Maybe I'll stand corrected. I'll ask him in a second. But before I get into the meat of it and introduce our guest, shameless plug, don't forget to download, subscribe, tell all your best friends about this podcast. If you want to contribute, let us know. We are open to ideas and we want to hear what you have to say. Or if there are any great guests you want on this podcast, let us know and we would love to collaborate where it makes sense. All right, let's get into it. So today on the podcast, we have Morgan Teachworth, who is the SVP in the Common Hardware Group, responsible for leading hardware and supply chain for Cisco's wireless and Meraki portfolio. So he took that role in December of 2022. And prior to that, he was the VP of Hardware and Supply Chain for Cisco Meraki. He came to us, to Cisco in 2012 via the Meraki acquisition, where he was one of the founding engineers, which is kind of a fun fact. And we're going to talk to him about that. Welcome to the podcast, Morgan. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me today, Sammy. And you are right. This is my first Meraki Unboxed. I've sent team members to Meraki Unboxed before and listened to their podcasts, and they were always really fantastic. So I am excited to be here.
Yay! I'm so excited to have you. And this is the first time you and I are meeting personally, but I've seen you a million times on all of the all hands, and you always have a really fun background. And I feel like you're kind of like a comedian a little bit. Am I right about that?
I mean, I don't know, but that's what people tell me. So it's not my fault if I'm funny. Um,
Right.
Yeah, it's a weird thing being seen by so many people, like being on the
Yeah.
senior staff and showing up in those meetings. And I have like the smallest role in the all hands. So I'm glad that my background stuck out a little bit. I'm glad to be
Yeah.
making a little bit of a splash.
You totally make a splash. On those drab, dreary days when you have to talk about inventory, you're like, hey, at least I got a cool background. And we'll talk about that too, supply chain, what's going on in the industry, what's going on in the market. But
Oh, don't
I'm
don't throw me in the briar patch on supply chain. Yeah, it's only been 2 years of talking about it constantly. Can we talk about engineering a little bit today?
let's talk about
Yeah,
engineering. We'll do both. Compromise.
yeah.
Let's start from the beginning. I mean, why were you interested in hardware engineering, and how did you land at Meraki?
All right. So like a lot of people who ended up in engineering, I started young. I grew up in the era before personal computers and didn't grow up in Silicon Valley. So my exposure to computers, to early computing, was really from a hardware angle. It was working with older, Mac 2s, trying to cobble things together, like using them in the lab and then taking old ones and putting them together. So I was kind of that classic, like, take it apart and put it together kid. And then through school, I kind of gravitated to the math and science. I gravitated to playing around with stuff that you could put your hands on. Not like an early programmer so much as a system builder, building circuits, putting. I grew up in a house that was being remodeled constantly from the age of 10 till I left to go to college. So I just learned to do a lot. And then when I went to school, I started studying mechanical engineering. I really loved it, but this was like 98 to 2000 era. So there wasn't like a lot of glamour in mechanical engineering. It was all about computer science. Wasn't really ready to make that leap, but I went into electrical engineering. And it was there while studying at Stanford that I met Sanjit, who was the original CEO and founder of Meraki. I was roommates with him, or suite mates, apartment mates with him for a while. And when we graduated, he went on to MIT to study with the RoofNet program that eventually became the genesis for the Meraki as a company. I went to work at NVIDIA as an RTL designer. And for those of you who've ever done chip design, it's basically programming, which means it's basically sitting in front of a computer all day, yelling at it and having the computer tell you that you're wrong. And I hated it. I did it for 4 years. I have a great respect for what programmers do, but I never, ever, ever want to do it again myself. So 4 years in, I was ready to quit. I was doing the engineer version of dropping out, which is thinking about going to law school and studying intellectual property. And then Sanjit showed up and said, "Hey, we're starting a company." I said, "I don't care what it's doing. What do you need done?" And what he needed was somebody who had done a little bit of this, mechanical engineering, a little bit of that, electrical engineering, and was willing to work with him to make this physical product to bring the concepts from the RoofNet program to life and make it mainstream. So I started part-time working for Meraki on a string while I was extracting myself from NVIDIA. I was putting solar panels and access points in the parking lot of this janky little office that was at the time smaller than my apartment, and my apartment was pretty small. And when I finally made the leap, I think Meraki was maybe 6 or 7 people at the time when I made the full leap
Wow.
to full time from that little office, and I've just been riding it along ever since from that 2006, and I never looked back.
Wow. What an incredible story. So you were really, really there at the beginning.
I was, yeah, and
Oh, yeah.
there are folks around the building still, like Sean and Dan, who work in like the back end, the cloud, the software, who'd been on RoofNet, who had worked with Sanjit there. We all kind of joined around that same time. So it's nice. Although the founders have gone, a lot of that early spirit still kind of, walks the halls. And so it's really nice for me to still be part of that continuous motion. Since 2006 to now, it's going on 16, 17 years.
Yep. Yeah. Wow. The Meraki magic still lives. We got to keep it alive. Who else will, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, tell us about your experience as one of the founding engineers at Meraki. I mean, what is your current role encompass? And can you give us a little bit of a day in the life? What does your
That
day
was
look
two.
like?
That was a spectrum of questions that spans 16 years. Being a founding engineer. What Meraki was doing when I joined was bringing up a product with a manufacturer in Asia, trying to drive it to mass manufacture, working in what the advanced wireless technologies of its time, both indoor and outdoor. And I was qualified to do zero of those things, zero of them, basically. Um, I joined Meraki, and one of the first things that I realized was, especially when it came to our partners, the business development, the contracts, working with Asian manufacturing and joint design manufacturers, that I was in way over my head. So the first thing I did was hire my own boss. Like you're at a startup, that it's dependent on you to get work done. And so Hans and I went, and Hans was one of the founders. Hans and I went and we interviewed a fellow named Ben from Apple and convinced him to join. And like Ben became my boss. And I learned a ton. The first thing he did was he told me get a passport because I had never been out of the country. And then he
Wow.
proceeded to take me on a 2.5 week trip, starting with Shenzhen, China, all the way through Hong Kong, Taiwan, where a lot of our stuff is manufactured to this
Right.
day. So that was my experience as a founding engineer. Like I knew how to run a lab bench and I knew how to read a schematic and I knew how to CAD a little bit. I wasn't good at any of it. I had a college education in these things rather than any real experience in them because I'd been chip designing. But then this just like splash in the deep end of being out there with partners, starting to work with customers, working on contracts, like all of the people aspects of engineering, which I had sorely, sorely missed. And in truth, like that's what I love is working with groups of engineers, working with groups of innovators, like building something big together across the globe with a whole lot of people. And like that's kind of what my role encompasses today. So I have an internal team, I have an engineering team that does product R&D through architecture, design, ramp to manufacturing, and I have a supply chain team that like buys those goods and watches the population of them and make sure that the customers are having a good time. It's end to end. But what it really is building this giant ecosystem, mostly outside the walls of Cisco, that we work with day in and day out to build lots of different products. And that organization, that extended family through contracted marriage, basically, like, it breathes, it grows, and it shrinks, and it changes over time depending on the products that we make. When we introduced cameras, that required a whole new ecosystem to be built overnight. And like, it's like a whole new wing of the family that lives over there in IoT land now. So it's really, really exciting. And my role now is basically just like playing slightly distant patriarch to a very, very big extended family through a lot of the people that have grown up with me inside the Meraki organization who, run or coordinate very big pieces of that now. It's super exciting. And of course, I am part of the common hardware group. So like, after being a quote Merakian for so long, like, now I'm a Merakian and a Cisconian in Cisco, like really trying to grab onto that Cisco identity and drive the Meraki business to great heights using the power of Cisco, but also drive Central Cisco into some of the best practices, adopting that Meraki magic, because we all want to grow the top line of the whole business a whole hell of a lot. So that's my role today, is evangelizing, making sense of what doesn't make sense from an outsider's perspective on Meraki, and turning that outsider perspective into an insider perspective, and frankly, like, growing my Meraki family to include all of Cisco.
Right. No small feat, I'd like to call out.
Thank you.
Yeah, no small feat. It's crazy to think in your 16, 19 years that you've been here, the evolution of your role and how much more you're taking on, probably. And also the commonalities from when you started, in manufacturing and going out to these factories and deciding what chipset and what manufacturers to work with. I mean, you're doing so much more, but also there's kind of this line to the same. I mean,
the funny thing is so doing this for like 16, 17 years, I was a dumb kid out there doing things for the first time. And like, I was working with some dumb kids at these companies who were assigned to like junior baby accounts that maybe would never go anywhere, like Meraki. And now over time, like, I've been here and I have the position I have now, and they've been with their companies in Taiwan in many cases for many years. And so like, I walk over there and I'm working with the GM of a major group of a large multinational manufacturing company. And I'm like, hey, dumb kid, I remember you. And he's like, yeah, you too, dummy. And it's very strange. And it's like, when you're young, and you're an outsider to any group, you're like, there's an old boys club, and it's usually an old boys club, and you're like, that really sucks, and I hate it. And then you grow up and you realize that, like, shit, I stumbled right into an old boys club, and like, here I am, and like, what am I gonna do with it? And who's in this club, and who is looking at me and saying, look at those guys, they're awful. Like, what are we doing to make sure that we don't repeat the cycle that we felt and that everyone around us felt? And for everybody, not just people who are like us and coming up, but like everybody who's anywhere in that journey towards, having had a career, anybody who's building a career, like, how do we make sure that they don't feel like they're perennially on the outside of kind of go through the same grow up journey that we did,
Right. Well, I think just your level of self-awareness, though, and the acknowledgement that exists, leaps and bounds ahead, right? Because you're consciously thinking about that. Which some
Thank
people
you.
don't.
I mean, it's hard because sometimes you meet someone early career, and what you want to be is like, look, I'm sorry to tell you this, you're a dummy. So was I. So am I. Like, there's very little difference between you and me, except I'm sitting on the other side of this desk, right? And I think with hindsight, I can say, like, yeah, everybody should have admitted that, and at this point, like, everybody should admit that. Like,
Mhm.
we're all doing our best to make this really, really big machine run. And like, whether you've been doing it a long time or you've been doing it a little while, like no matter what your background, like you're bringing something to it. And like, yeah, everyone at the table is some kind of dummy, right? So like, let's make the table a little bit bigger, and maybe like we'll have enough dummies to figure this one out.
There you go. Well, I mean, this leads us perfectly into my next question, which has to do with hard lessons learned, right? In your career, as you navigate, as you grow, as you evolve. I mean, you have a big job, and COVID probably didn't make that any easier, right? Given all the things with supply chain that I won't get into. Um, but what lessons, it's not the highs when we're riding the highs and things are
Yeah,
going well that define our career. It's how do we show up when
yeah.
stuff gets really hard.
Well,
Can you talk to us or give our listeners insight into maybe a really tough lesson you learned and how you grew from it?
yeah. And this goes back to my like table of dummies story, but essentially, if you're working and the problems that you have are not much bigger than you, if they're not giant, hairy problems that need to be solved, then you're not punching up. You're not punching at the level that you need to be. You're not working on something that's going to change the world. You're not working on something that's going to grow yourself. Um, and when you do find a problem like that, you're not going to solve it on your own. Like if you could have solved it on your own, it would be a smaller problem. Like you're going to be extremely reliant on the people around you, um, your peers, if you're a manager, your employees, people in the industry, resources like EROs, like just folks across the organization, like senior leaders, industry leaders, your family, your friends, your neighbor. Like there's going to be a lot of influences there. And like it's a really big table. And everybody who's working on these problems can't solve them on their own. Like if they could solve them on their own, they would politely ask you to leave the table and they would just solve the problem on their own. But you're really in it with a bunch of people. So when you are, when you're starting out, or if you've been working for a while at a comfort level, you can get it in your head that like, whatevs, I got this. Like, I got it. I'm great. I'm going to solve this. Like, I'm going to get it done. And like, fine, maybe you are. Like, maybe you're in a comfortable place and you can just solve all of the problems that you have. But it's like, it's the world's job and the company's job and your manager's job to put you in a position where you are not just punching on your own and you are heavily, heavily dependent on the ecosystem that's around you and the relationships that you've built. So at the
Mhm.
end of the day, I don't care if you're technical, like a very, very technical person, a technical specialist, like the only person in the world with a PhD in XYZ, like the relationships you build and the relationships that you sustain and the allies that you make and like the aligned vision that you have and your ability to communicate and line up behind a really big push is how you're going to get and keep the rock up the hill, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So build a network, build relationships that are long lasting and put yourself in positions where you might have to lean on other people to accomplish something great because
Yeah.
that's going to push you outside of your comfort zone.
And admit it when you don't know. Like admit it when you need the help. Admit it when you don't have the answer. Like that's the key. Like if you're pretending that you're just gonna solve it, people are lazy. They're gonna believe you and you're gonna be sweating every night because you're not actually solving the problem. Like admit that you need the people around you. And when you need help, admit you need help, advice, another idea, like seek it out. I think nothing can go farther towards building a really inclusive environment at work than conscious culture. And a big part of that conscious culture is like being open to admitting that you yourself need the environment. You're vulnerable and like you need help from anybody. Like you're desperate, you'll take it, and that people will step in and people will accept the invitation to step into your orbit and contribute to something great if you're making it obvious that it is very, very welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you and I can both agree, even I think people's biggest fear in admitting they don't know is I'm going to look dumb, right? Or the people are going to laugh at me. When in reality, when people come to me and say, I don't know, or I need help, or I'm spitballing this, can I bounce this off? It's so incredibly bold to me, and I want to help that person 2 times more, right? Or
Mhm.
when I say to my team, hey, I don't know, but I'll find out. Let me get back to you instead of saying some bogus answer. People
Yeah.
appreciate it big time.
One of the biggest privileges of rank or position, and like one of the biggest privileges of privilege in general, is the ability to get away with looking dumb. Like I can go in a room with lots of people, a big room, and I can ask a really basic, really dumb question. And like I've got enough track record to back up that like it's fine I'm asking this dumb question. Or people give me the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, he's asking this question for the benefit of the rest of us. No, I really needed the answer to that question. But
Yeah.
I understand that like the world does not afford everybody that privilege, right? And I think like over time, certainly I feel more and more like it's kind of my duty to show up and let myself be obviously ignorant in a room
Mm,
until I understand.
right.
Um, and it's really hard to coach people to do that because it's you feel so vulnerable doing it, especially if like you don't have the privilege to back it up.
Hmm.
Um, but I'll encourage everybody, like, do it as much as you can, do it as much as you feel comfortable doing it. Like, it is, it's an amazing feeling as you're able to get away with it more and more. And it just brings you many happy returns when you are willing to put that on the line and learn from people who know better than you.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. I mean, I used to have, not used to, I don't want to say I fully conquered it, but I had this complex around not being smart enough, right? And therefore, my limiting belief was that if I ask this question, I'm going to look a certain way, and the more you evolve and grow in your career, I've gotten more and more comfortable with saying, I don't know, or I don't know, but I'm going to pull in the right people, or, let's double check that before I give it. And it's so freeing when you kind of let go of knowing it all. It's so freeing.
Yeah,
There you go.
100%. I like to think when I'm putting a team together, when I'm hiring, like everybody I hire, they say like should raise the bar. And then people say,
Right.
you're silly. You have a team of excellent people. How is every hire supposed to raise the bar? You say, well, everybody I hire in my org, they're better at something than I am. Like
Hmm.
it might not even be work, but they're better at something or they know something and they've lived something that I haven't. And that is now accessible to me. Like I don't want to say a book collector. I'll say I'm a book hoarder. And so
Hmm.
it's like, every person in the org, every person in my network, like they're another book on the shelf. And when push comes to shove, like there's something in that book that is valuable to the business, of course, but especially like to me as a person that likes people, like there's something valuable there. And I tell myself in every hire, I used to say like, what's your superpower? And now it's not even necessarily a superpower. It's just like, what have you got that like I want to taste in the short period of time that we get to work together? It's
Yeah.
selfish, but I think it helps build a really fantastic organization.
Absolutely. That's my hiring mentality. Same page. Let's transition and talk a little bit about Meraki's hardware portfolio because it is changing. It is changing rapidly. I've been at Cisco Meraki for 5 years. Even since the time I joined, it's transformed. What are some of the challenges your team is solving for our customers, and kind of, give us a lens at how the
Yeah.
portfolio is really developed?
The exciting thing about the growth of the Meraki portfolio is it started targeted at this whole of an underserved market. Our first year tagline was Internet for the next billion people. We're still working on that next billion people. I think now it's like 3 billion underserved people around the globe that Cisco is trying to build an inclusive future for all with. And we took that little space and we've expanded it and expanded it. We went from like the very small low income to SMB to the mediums to commercial to hospitality, just every vertical we could get into. And it continues to grow up the chart. And from a hardware portfolio perspective, like when you're doing the smaller stuff, like you're taking some risks, you're fast following technology, you're building products like cheaper, you're making a few compromises here and there to make sure that you're democratizing it so it's available. And then as you go up, you start to segment your line. You get higher level of performance, you get higher and higher levels of quality, you get longer lifetimes for your product. In every case, they're going to live longer because you're going to live longer. So you stop thinking in 5-year increments and you start thinking in 20-year increments in terms of service to customers. And we're on this cusp where like we've conquered a big market, and Meraki on its own would weep because there was really nothing left to conquer in that space. And so we said, we're going to open up this giant enterprise market, which Cisco has served so well, and we're going to bring a little bit of the Meraki magic to it. And that's challenging for my team, building products in that space, even helping to, I want to say, like converge or borrow products from that space, like we did with our early entrance to the Catalyst switching line, and now moving Meraki like best practices and experience, even if it's not like pure board design, but moving the ethos up into that space. It's a new set of challenges, and it requires a different kind of skill set. And frankly, it requires the kind of patience that none of us had. Like none of us had the patience to go and work in enterprise. And I'm not even digging on Cisco there, because like Cisco from a Meraki perspective is slow. The reason isn't because of the way Cisco is built. It's because enterprise demands this level of attention and detail and diligence. And now we are learning how to play in that space. And at the same time, we're trying to bring that like Meraki massive acceleration to the business. And it's hard to hold those two things in your head at the same time. It's enough to make my teams dizzy, the go fast, break it kind of mentality with the like absolutely no breaking allowed, like strong service and customer focus, better, bigger customers with larger requirements. It's tough. And so you're seeing right now this rapid evolution of the Meraki portfolio, our own products, designed in the Meraki house, to the products that are designed by Cisco Meraki jointly, as well as looking forward to adopting products that are so far from anything that my team has ever worked on, the big switches, the data center type stuff, and how those might become cloud managed. And even if I never touch the hardware, my team never touches it, or we don't touch the supply chain directly, like we're still trying to put like grubby little Meraki fingerprints on all of those solutions and offerings, and the manufacturing and the partners and the business development and the ecosystem, to ensure kind of a seamless customer experience all the way through. It's tough. There's a lot going on there, and I'm really excited about it because I've always been about leverage. My team has always been really small. We use partners, we use contractors, we leverage other people's manufacturing, and we use them for problem solving. The team has always been as small as I could get away with. Your startup, that's how you operate. Even coming into Cisco with the money pouring into us 10 years ago, we stayed small and lean, and we used leverage. And now that we're moving into the big organization, well, the game is the same. It is leverage. What is the absolute best product that we can put out? What is the best solution and customer experience that we can generate? Whether we're doing it ourselves, or whether we're using the longest lever, or whether we're just barely like throwing rocks at somebody's window to get their attention, it's all about leverage. And a team wants to see their impact. So sometimes we have a huge impact at Cisco, but it feels like the action we took was so small. Did we ever really take an action at all? And so helping the team understand that there's a very big snowball or avalanche effect at the work that we do today in getting to the Cisco of tomorrow, small actions in a big organization have big impact, and it doesn't feel the same. A lot of my team members have been here for 8+ years. It doesn't feel the same as it did 8 years ago, but the impact on the world, like the size of the ding that Meraki is putting in the universe, is much, much bigger, even if it feels like the hammer is very tiny now.
Yeah, yeah. So let's I want to use like an example to kind of for listeners. We have some listeners that are really technical partner folks from our partner community, our channel, and then some just Cisco and Meraki employees, and then outside of the organization. So I want to give like a tangible example of kind of what you just were talking about. It's never been more apparent, right, that the Cisco portfolio and the Meraki portfolio, like we are one Cisco, right? And we are seeing that merge kind of happen with some of the new products that we have hitting the street and the new features like cloud monitoring, right? Where you can see your Catalyst switches within dashboard. And then we have this whole new line of access points, right? That are the CW model, right? So like these Catalyst powerful access points managed through the Meraki dashboard, which are, by the way, super popular with our customers, which is awesome to see. Talk to us about what that process is with your team specifically. So going from MR, right, which is our APs, to CW, like
Yeah.
the hardware component of that now being managed through dashboard. What imprint does your team have on that?
I'm really glad you brought that one up, because especially, for the folks who are listening to this who want to like see what we've actually done and not just hear about what's happening or gonna happen. The first generation of converged access points, the CW, this was a collaborative effort by two teams, the Meraki wireless team and the Common Hardware Group wireless team, which are now one merged team that I look after inside the Common Group. That's recent. That's only the last couple of months. In the beginning, you have these two teams, both of whom have their own set of customers, both of whom have their set ideas about what a product should look like, and how it should be built, and have a lot of pride in what they've built over the years. The wireless portfolios, they were of similar magnitude. The Common Hardware Group, the Cisco Catalyst offering, maybe twice the size of the Meraki business, but like both up there in the billions. And bringing them together, you have a lot of egos, and not even just egos, but just a lot of pride. And rightfully so, because they had both achieved so much and had had a long history. It's the oldest product line for Meraki, and it's a 20-year plus product line at Cisco. So in the beginning, people want to fight. They want to fight for what they believe in, and what they believe in is not wrong. There's nobody coming to that room who is wrong. They all have a very valid point of view, and they all want to do good work. And so it was a tussle. And a lot of that early tussle was, okay, I own this and you own that. Like this is my lunch and that's your lunch. And like, we're both going to serve different lunches to the customer, but like they have to look the same and they have to be the same. And so I get to watch you make your lunch and you get to watch me make my lunch, and we get to try and tell each other what to do, but nobody's in charge really. And that was not working. That was not working very well. You can imagine, based on my description, you're like, how the hell would you expect that to work? That doesn't work. So we really had to get those teams working together. Like every project, each access point is its own little kitchen. And we couldn't have at the time a central kitchen and a Meraki kitchen and expect the meal coming out to feel like they belong in the same restaurant. We had to mix things up, and we did. And it was uncomfortable for everyone. But as I was talking about people, like fundamentally, people just needed to shake up and like rebuild their daily network. And they did. And those products they're awesome products. They have a lot of the like Meraki design aesthetic and a lot of the, cool, wiggly little bits that set Meraki off, but they also have that deep commitment to the Cisco quality, like all of the legacy of high performance. Nothing was lost in bringing those products together. I don't know, maybe a little bit of efficiency in the first generation in terms of how we worked was lost. But so what? Like, so what? We lost a little bit of efficiency to go build something really fantastic. And now that those teams had worked together for a
Mhm.
generation, now they are one team. And that means we're set up for success moving forward. And we're seeing this pattern repeat not just across the Meraki hardware organization where, our switching teams are working together, our routing teams, like some of the IoT teams. Not only are we starting to repeat that model, but you're seeing this across the entire organization. Meraki has run as a independent business unit for quite some time, and that was great. We had a lot of success that way, but we are all not going to succeed if we continue that way. So all across the functions and teams of the organizations, it is becoming one big meshed organization. And there are heroes on both sides. And I mean, let's be honest, there are villains on both sides, and there are good practices on both sides. And like, it's very, very cliche to say we're going to get best of both. And I don't even like to think of it that way because it implies that like we only get to keep what we had. Like, we are building better. Like, we are building better now than we were before. And across all of the different offerings and product lines, you are going to see a net better offering and a net better customer experience available to more customers up the ladder and down the ladder all across the globe because of how the different teams, engineering, sales, marketing, support, everybody across the board are coming together with kind of a single-minded focus of a joint solution.
Right, right. I'm really glad that you called that out. You can kind of take ownership of that. I feel like kind of the elephant in the room, like how are we working together? And we're pushing a giant rock up a hill and setting egos aside. But I think you called it out beautifully, which is like there should be. There's a lot of pride in both product lines, and they've both been wildly successful. But I can't imagine that's been an easy feat initially, like that V1, right, of getting the teams to come together. What's something, quickly, and then we'll close out. I'll ask one more question. What's something you as a people leader have learned about bringing two teams together to really, work together and try to hear each other out? Have you had any like aha moments through this process?
There's that one of the Cisco values is to like give your ego a day off. And it's very tempting to conflate, like I said, like ego and pride. And you can ask somebody, give your ego the day off, but you can't ask somebody to not be proud of something that was really fantastic. So you have to let teams be proud of their history and their heritage, what they've done, where they're from. I mean, you can extend this all the way to like you have to let people be proud of who they are and where they're from and how they live. And at the same time, like that pride does not mean they have to show up with a big ego. It doesn't mean that they have to be right or righter than their coworkers or the other teams. It is okay to not give pride a day off while you're giving your ego a day off and like bring everybody together. And like that was a hard thing for me to understand. It's part of everybody in. Like everybody in requires you to give your ego a day off, but it does not require you to compromise who you are or what you're proud of.
Mhm. Yeah, well said. That's a good tidbit nugget I'll take from that. Um, this has been a really fun conversation. I feel like we could talk a lot longer. So we need a part two already. I'm just calling it now.
Always happy to. I mean, we got through the history and now we barely touched on where we're going. I'm very happy either to come back or bring some members of my team, or if you want to bring a like old goats of Meraki panel together at some point, like very, very happy to try and make
Old
that happen.
Old goats of Meraki. Heard it here first. I love it. Well, you mentioned something earlier about conscious culture, right? And that being something that's important to you. And when you're hiring and building teams, certainly something you're thinking about. So when you're not leading the Meraki hardware organization or the common hardware group, I'll call it that, what other initiatives, right, fuel you? What gives you energy? You mentioned your superpower earlier. We have some incredible employee resource groups at Cisco, at Meraki. In what way do you kind of contribute and give back in that regard?
Yeah. I think the number one thing, and like I'm gonna stretch and show my shirt if I'm on video. Um, the number one thing is that I'm the executive sponsor of QFAM, which is the Meraki LGBTQ plus organization, and adjacent to the Cisco Central Pride organization. And I've been doing that for several years, since the beginning of the pandemic, so at least 3 years, if not a little bit longer. And working with that group and being proximate to the other EROs, because there's a lot of overlap in population. Like the QFAM, it's the one group that populates across all of the other EROs. You get a lot of overlap there. Um, it's given me a really good appreciation for like what it takes for people to really show up as themselves in an organization, and for a minority that is very, very invisible. Like it's capable of being invisible and capable of being seen, and is stronger when seen. And the environment that has to be there, like to be seen, to be heard, to have community and be part of the larger community. So I continue to support the group. There's a leadership team of the group, and they are fantastic, and they do all the real work, and all I do is show up and maybe find money for them to do things, and then occasionally stand on stage and take credit for it. But yeah, I really love doing that work, and I like digging in with the D&I community of Meraki and of Cisco. I also do a lot of work on the talent side. I personally enjoy going to any kind of convention and being like a talent and brand ambassador. Even if I'm not hiring, I enjoy bringing people into the tent. In another life, I would have enjoyed being a carnival barker, so like the talent mission, and honestly, like this is a good place to work. Like Cisco is a great place to work, and like you can go look at all the awards that say it's a great place to work, but like I work here and this is a good place to work. So bringing people into that, and like bringing people of all stripes into that, and like making sure that those stripes remain distinct, is really, really important for me, and a work that I continue to do, like in the spare time when I'm not trying to build product or put Meraki ethos into other products or try to buy parts. So like every time you challenge me about the supply chain, just remember, if I wasn't working on the supply chain, I was working on diversity. You can't fault me for that. Like, cut me a break. I was doing diversity stuff in that 10 seconds a day when I wasn't trying to buy switches. But yeah, shout out to supply chain on that one. Things are turning around. Don't ask me when, but they're turning. It's a big ship. Yeah, so that's really what I focus on.
Very cool. I did not know that you were the executive sponsor for that group. I'm so glad I asked about it.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, this has been a really fun conversation. Again, I'd love for you to come back. This was super insightful. You were really honest. You were really vulnerable. I love that you shoot it straight. I feel like sometimes, the higher you get up on the ladder, maybe the tougher it is to just be super transparent and real and raw. So I just want to thank you. I appreciate it. I know our listeners are going to love this episode.
I'm glad. I apologize to the comms team if they are listening, and I accept the penalty or the torches that you will show up at my door with. But I think that it's valuable to see what's going on in the building. So thank you for having me today. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Fantastic. Well, that wraps up another episode. Morgan, I'm definitely going to have you now come speak to my team, which is the U.S. Public Sector Organization, because we'll just get a hoot and a half out of you now that we've built this relationship. So tune in to next week. We'll have another episode in 2 weeks. New content coming at you. Morgan, thank you again from the Meraki Unboxed family. We're so happy that you joined us today. And stay safe out there, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.